This year, I became a fan of the Resident Evil franchise. I beat the remakes of Resident Evil 1 through 4 to be a better editor for another channel. I dipped my toe in the water with the non-number titles, but I still need to beat like 0, 5, and Revelations. And by the request of a lot of viewers, I did go back and play the original trilogy, and since I found things in the original trilogy that I liked more than the remakes, I just decided to continue from there, and I jumped straight into Code Veronica. All I knew jumping into it was that it followed Claire after the events of Resident Evil 2, searching for her brother Chris, one of the protagonists of Resident Evil 1. Also, there was a dude named Steve, a pair of twins that I assumed were the bad guys, and I also knew that Wesker showed up at one point since I already knew about the whole joke about Chris taking steroids after he got his ass kicked here. Other than those things, I practically walked into the game blindly with a couple of hints from my chat from time to time, so today I'll just be walking through my experience with the game. Like I said, the game follows Claire Redfield after she broke into an umbrella facility in Paris under the assumption that her brother was there, but she ends up getting captured by security, which leads to her getting transferred and imprisoned on Rockford Island. It's an island owned by the Umbrella Corporation, and it's where we spend the first half of the game. Claire starts out in the prison area, but there's also a military training facility with an Alaskan bullworm guarding the entrance. There's also the palace that later leads to the fancy private residence. Well, I say fancy on the outside because inside it's just ugh. And finally, an underwater area that houses the escape planes. Claire's goal is to obviously get out of there, but with the added obstacles of the new outbreak and Alfred Ashford, the guy in charge of this island and grandson to one of Umbrella's founding members, Edward Ashford. He's also hyper obsessed about his twin sister Alexia, who at the early stages of the game, we have to even question if she's real because he's like pretending to be her, and again, I hate this massive doll replica he has of her. I also can't forget about Steve Burnside, or as someone in my chat called him, Canadian Sonic the Hedgehog.
I said I was sorry.
He is a reckless teen who almost kills Claire on their first meeting, but then they end up working together to try to escape. Normally, I'm pretty suspicious of new characters in Resident Evil based off my experience. I just assume they're either going to die or betray me. But learning Steve's backstory and how his father used to work for Umbrella and got him and Steve in prison selling company data on the black market, it was enough for me to trust him and almost cook him alive by accident. I do have to say, though, that if you watched my Code Veronica playthrough on the channel, the first stream was bad, because I was pretty much just worried about the technical issues throughout that whole stream. It was very blurry and laggy, and that was the moment I realized that all my past Resident Evil streams were also just as blurry and laggy. Because of this, I didn't feel like I was enjoying the game during my first stream. I felt like I was pretty much just forcing myself throughout the entire thing to just play it. So for the next 2 weeks, I tried my best to fix everything on my end, and then I restarted the game from the beginning. And once everything started going smoothly, I finally was able to pretty much enjoy the game. And I honestly enjoyed it a lot more than I expected I would. First of all, the game carried over the movement and combat mechanics of the past games, so it was pretty much easy to jump into, but the best part, in my opinion, was the knife. In every Resident Evil game, these knives felt so hollow and flimsy, and it just felt like it wasn't doing any real damage. It was just a way of hearing a like squishy, fleshy sound, you know? But in Code Veronica, this is undoubtedly the strongest knife out of every other knife in the Resident Evil games, or at least out of all the ones that I played, and this is probably the only Resident Evil game where I'd honestly consider doing a knife-only run, because this is just how much faith I have in this beautiful weapon. Because if I'm not using a knife, I'm using a gun to down enemies so I could use my knife again, or I just forgot because I just got really locked into taking down an enemy. And if I'm being real here, seeing these bats fly around or like these keys jingling in front of me, you know, so I gotta like take them all out. And speaking of weapons, this is probably the first and only game in the franchise where I don't have any disliking towards any of the weapons. I genuinely had no preference as to what I wanted to use in my arsenal because they were all equally as good, or at least in my eyes, except for the weapons that have like percentages instead of ammo, because I usually want to save those for specific moments. Although, for transparency's sake, I mostly listened to my chat whenever they told me which weapon would be better to use in certain sections, so you know, whenever I entered certain areas, I would just listen to whatever my chat thought was best. There were also a lot of people in chat who told me instead of using pistol ammo, it'd be better if I just used the crossbow handgun instead of the normal one. In all the other Resident Evil games I played, I usually avoided using the bow-like weapons for no real reason. I just never really liked them or was really like drawn to using them. But just like the knife, I feel like the crossbow handgun was just as fun to use in this game than it has been in any other game I've played. I'm not saying this bow weapon is better, I am just saying that I like it more personally. Also, I can't forget about the enemies. It wouldn't be a Resident Evil game without zombie people and zombie dogs, but it looks like the crows were retired in this entry in favor of bats, and honestly, these guys weren't as annoying to deal with. Or, you know, kill me before I reach a save point. There's also what I like to call these one-off enemies, like the giant worm, the zombie doctor that is just incredibly fast and strong, and an optional boss fight that you can find later in the game called the Albinoid Adult, which I thought was kind of weird, and there were a couple others. Also, this game is home to my now least favorite enemy variant in the franchise. You all know I love hunters, and as a Florida man, it's my obligation to love all reptiles and amphibians, but the sweeper variants of these, oh my gosh, they're just evil. They're just evil. They're stronger, they're faster, and they're poisonous. And in the second half of the game, there are these moth-looking enemies exclusive to this one hallway where they are constantly just dropping a poisonous powder on you, and if they land on you, they lay their eggs on your body, and, you know, now that I think about it a little bit more, even though I hated a lot of these enemies, I still think that the stupid worm boss from Resident Evil Nemesis was way worse. Sorry, the name of the game just quickly escaped me for a second. I do think Bandersnatches are pretty cool though. They're like these failed tyrants that have stretchy arms, and they can also use those arms to not only grab onto you from a distance, but they can also use their arms to help them, like, get to you quicker. Like, they'll sometimes use it to stretch up to a different floor. An interesting thing about this game that makes it unique in my opinion is just the fact that there are many glitches, apparently. Going into the game, I heard it was a glitchy mess, and there are sections where you could get soft lock and lose all your items and things like that. However, the only glitch that I encountered was one where I got an infinity herb, and like my herb never ran out, just because I read a book in the wrong order, and that like changed a value or something that made it so like I could just use this herb whenever I wanted to. I tried not to use the herb too often, so it didn't feel like I was cheating, but other than that, I feel like I don't really have a place to really talk much about the bugs and glitches that this game has. Although I do want to point out that one of my chatters who was replaying the game around the same time was playing the Sega Dreamcast version and got into a glitch where they claim a Bandersnatch was under the map attacking them from below, which I think is pretty funny. And I want to know how to recreate that glitch because I wish I could see that for myself. Anyways, after collecting some stuff that we needed to progress, we eventually were attacked by Wesker, and we find out that he was raiding this island by complete coincidence of Claire's arrival. Around the same time, we find out Alfred likes to pretend to be his sister, but he didn't realize he was pretending to be her until he looked in the mirror. This is due to the fact that he's absolutely obsessed with her, and I hate this massive doll replica. Claire and Steve eventually make it to a plane, but there's this bridge in the way, so Claire has to raise it and then make her way around. Around the same time, Alfred unleashes a real tyrant to stop the pair, and he also takes his own jet to pursue the two. Also, this tyrant is an absolute fraud. My chat told me how easily cheesable it is, and I guess Alfred knew that too, since he remotely sets their jet onto autopilot and makes the pair crash onto an umbrella base in the Antarctic, where now you have to explore for a while until you find and plan a way to escape with Steve to an Australian observation base just a couple miles away, but the two get jumped by Alfred, which causes him to fall to his death, which then triggers the locked up monster Nosferatu, aka Alexander Ashford, to use all his strength to break through his restraints and ambush the pair later on. He's pretty easy to deal with as long as you keep distant from him and use Alfred's gun on his exposed heart enough times, but it probably won't be easy if you're like me and whiffed almost every single shot. This is a special weapon, so there is no way of reloading it at all. Also, there's something that can happen in this fight where if you get hit by the boss's poisonous mist, when you reunite with Claire later, she will be poisoned, and you have to find like this antidote in order to fix her up. And the reason I say when we reunite with Claire is because immediately after this fight, we see that Alfred, in his dying breath, released the real Alexia, and she uses her powers in order to stop the pair from escaping. The reason why she was in a cryo sleep for over like a decade is because she wanted the virus she injected herself with to fully work with her body, and if she didn't freeze herself, it wouldn't have been done properly. We are then left on a cliffhanger for a while as we switch over to Chris, where we see him explore Rockford Island and parts of the island that we didn't fully explore, and some parts that are now changed after the chaos that ensued much earlier. Except now we have to deal with Wesker and the monsters he brought to the island while we're looking for a way to get to the Arctic base. And okay, I feel like right now I have to be fully transparent. There was just something off with this game. Like, something about this game didn't click with me out of all the classic Resident Evil games I've finished. The playthrough just felt off, and I wasn't sure if it was because of the fully 3D environments or the puzzles in this game just being a little bit harder or something else. And it wasn't until after I had already beaten the game that I realized I just suck at playing games in front of people and knowing that people are watching me while I play games. I couldn't really think like myself because I really wanted to just talk to my chat, and I have a weird just mental line between the me on and off of YouTube that makes it really hard for me to just enjoy a game with an audience watching me. And I'm not saying it wasn't like that I was enjoying the game. I'm not saying I didn't enjoy the game. Code Veronica is among my top 5 favorite Resident Evil games now, and by the time I reached Chris's section, I felt extremely comfortable just at this point in my playthrough. But there was just this feeling I couldn't shake off, and I couldn't describe with this one. I think maybe it was just this game didn't click with me, just from the fact that it didn't feel like the other classic games I had grown used to at this point over the past few months. But at the same time, it didn't feel different, you know? It's one of those things that I can't put into words, but if I didn't mention it in the video, it would have just felt like I wasn't truly giving my true feelings on this game. I'm honestly just confused, and ironically, the moment things started to feel kind of right again was just this lead up to the final areas when you get to like the deeper part of the Arctic base, where you find these rooms that are callbacks to Resident Evil I, and they honestly put a big smile on my face and reminded me, like, you know, this is still the same Resident Evil despite it not feeling the same while feeling the same. It's so weird. It's so weird. I feel like I'm rambling at this point. Actually, no, I'm not rambling. Part of these confusing feelings come from the puzzles in this game. Like, you know, you had your standard codes, you had your standard, like, you know, get these numbers that you need. But I was so embarrassed and felt like an idiot when it came to this game's more challenging puzzles. This game has a much harder, just puzzles in overall in comparison to all the other games in the original trilogy, like the family tree puzzle in the painting room, and also there was that other room with like the code that you had to get from like a clock like thing. Like, I was just embarrassed. I was slow, but the difficulty of these puzzles isn't the game's fault. Again, it's my own fault for not being able to just focus between the game and the stream and just like fully like thinking like straight, you know? Like, this is still, again, one of my top 5 Resident Evil games, but probably one of the games that I am the most embarrassed to have streamed in front of a stream because I felt like I wasn't giving it my best. But going back to this mansion area, it's there where Chris reunites with Claire, but because I got her poisoned during the Nosferatu fight, I had to go back and look for the antidote, which felt like another one of those RE1 callbacks where you had to go and find Richard's medicine. The pair briefly end up getting split up again while Claire looks for Steve, and Chris witnesses a fight between Wesker and Alexia, who honestly looks pretty badass in her first form, but it stopped feeling badass when Wesker forcefully tagged in Chris, and I was the one expected to fight her instead. But it was honestly pretty easy. While all that was happening, Steve, although he didn't really give me a great first impression, he was finally growing on me, so I was happy to see him when Claire found him and tried to rescue him, but what I wasn't happy about was that Alexia infected him and he tried to kill Claire. And now, I understand why my chat kept telling me to save the Infinity Herb, because if you don't, you need a health item to deal with Steve, or else you will be soft-locked in this moment. But honestly, the most heartbreaking part about this is that Steve dies. He ends up fighting back the virus, because yes, he did get infected by Alexia earlier, and that's the reason why he attacks Claire. But, like, I knew going into this game that he would die. I didn't know how, and yes, it did make me sad. In retrospect, it's even sadder when you think about the fact that Claire was locked in a room with him and his corpse, until Chris managed to unlock the door for her later. That in turn leads to the self-destruct sequence and the final boss fight. First you fight Alexia in her first form, then she quickly transforms into this ugly looking thing, I don't even know what you call this. And since the fight takes place right above a massive ant mound, she then summons a bunch of little worker ants to attack you, and after her second form she detaches from her main body and ends up flying away into her third form, which hilariously I defeated because she flew into my shot. Like, I had missed, but like somehow she just decided to fly into it. But despite this epic victory, after defeating the final boss comes the only part of the game I really disliked, the ending. Sure, Chris versus Wesker was a really cool thing to see, and it set up future events for them when they confront each other in Resident Evil 5. What Wesker says about taking Steve for the T. Veronica virus that's inside of him and alluding to the potential of him coming back to life, it honestly made me excited for that. But then I thought, how does this come into play when every new game before Resident Evil 7 had this extreme shift into a military action kind of genre instead of a survival horror with mysteries to uncover? I think the closest we got to anything T. Veronica related was Operation Javier, and I think Resident Evil 6, but I'm still going back and playing them all in numbered order now, so I haven't really gotten to that game yet, but still, no Steve. And I think the biggest letdown was Chris saying the same thing Leon did at the end of Resident Evil 2, vowing to take down Umbrella. The original trilogy and Code Veronica were setting up for this franchise's level of end-game event, yet when we reach Resident Evil 4, the game's opening cutscene has Leon talking about how Umbrella went to trial and shut down due to bankruptcy. Really? As much as I love Resident Evil 4, it felt like a reset than a new arc, and I don't remember if it was someone in my chat who told me this, or if it was something I read online, but between Code Veronica and Resident Evil 4, Capcom released a Resident Evil 1 remake and a game called Resident Evil 0, and it is believed Capcom abandoned the original story plans for the franchise out of fear since these games were deemed commercial failures. This led to Resident Evil 4's change in gameplay and story for what we got instead, and honestly, as a newer fan, it does make me feel sad and betrayed. And I dropped a water bottle. It did make me feel sad and betrayed as a newer fan because I was anticipating a proper final showdown with Umbrella. I wanted to witness it and be a more prominent factor in that takedown. But hopefully all the teasers and speculation and leaks and whatnot regarding Resident Evil 9 bringing back old key players from the Raccoon City incident turn out to be true, and we can get a proper final end game-like event. But anyways, yeah, those were my thoughts on Code Veronica and how it made me feel about the rest of the franchise. I really like the game, and I look forward to everything else that the franchise has to offer me in the future. Also, I stream myself playing these games sometimes. It may be hard to watch, especially those earlier parts, since a lot of my playthroughs are kind of ass, so especially the earlier ones. So if you want something a little different, I did play through all of Resident Evil 4, and hopefully you can take some time to watch it if you're interested. And later this month, I'll hopefully have the Resident Evil 4 video ready. Anyways, I'll catch you all on the flip side.